I think even today, I mean, there are some people. I actually know a few um, who are extremely diligent in their practice, in their study of animal reaction, or like animal body language, I should say, from I guess long history, and I guess I'm talking more whitetails again. Um, a lot of hunting experience as far as how to read body language of an animal. Extremely good shots, extremely diligent in their arrow building that can take deer at, those extended ranges of 60, 70, 80, out to 100 yards. But most of us, I would say, the majority of us are still killing deer, at least for me, um, for the most part, just inside regular vertical bow range, regular compound bow range. Um, I really like the way in your book, um, the way I've kind of been setting arrows up, and I kind of want to get your take on this and what I got from your book, how you kind of broke down kinetic energy, momentum, resistance of penetration, or what would be, you know, essentially the same formula as drag. As I liked how you and I guess Dr. Ed Ashby, you quoted him in here as saying that kinetic energy is a good measure of a bow's efficiency, in that, effectively your bow has your whatever draw weight in combination with your power stroke length of, you know what it how long it can transfer said energy is an amount of potential energy that then, once you pull the trigger, once you put all of that in motion, you're translating that potential energy to kinetic, and you can use kinetic energy as a measure of how efficient your bow, how much of the potential energy you're transferring to the actual arrow. And the way I've been, I guess, doing some um, arrow builds, and a few videos that have been, you know, not super popular, but I think helpful to people of specific bows, is I've been taking arrows. I've been basically starting with them from like what they would be factory. So the 390 grains with a 100 grain field point, shoot it through a chronograph, and then going up in increments of point weight, basically from 300 grain, or sorry, 100 grain field points to 300 grain field points, and then at times substituting in an arrow that's also got a little bit higher insert weight to try to cover 390 grains to like 650-ish, and finding a an area where basically your kinetic energy starts to drop off. So you're starting to lose some efficiency. Your momentum on a lot of those still going up, but your kinetic energy is starting to tail off in the, I don't know, a lot of the bows I have is like a 550, 530-ish grain range. Is that a good way, you think, to build an arrow, as far as it's not necessarily maximum momentum, but it's certainly a certainly an increase in momentum, and you're right at the point of, um, maximizing the crossbow's efficiency. Is that a is that a good like target from a deer hunter perspective, or should someone like myself or other people out there doing arrow building, should they even go further on the weight side, the FOC side, and continue to increase momentum, to a point where you're now kind of playing with, does it fly well or not? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, all of those are good ideas, and when you start putting them on graphs and charts, you'll find that those things don't those lines don't cross where you thought they were, and sometimes they don't cross at all. So originally I thought, well, I'll plot my speed and my arrow weight and plot that all out on a graph, and there should be a place where all of those lines cross, and bingo, that's right where I want to operate. Well, what I found out was those lines don't necessarily cross. So it was a good idea, it just didn't work. So what I found was, like, I tried out some 620 grain, 618 grain, something like that, broadheads built by a guy, by Bishop, and he had a really good idea and everything like that. And I really liked that concept because I could just take a regular arrow, screw that 618 grain broadhead on there, and go shoot Cape buffalo with it or whatever. And in fact, I did. The shot, I think it's in the I think I shot a Cape buffalo with it, and I also shot some what is it? Wildebeest with it.
Okay.
Worked real good, but the arrow's kind of fat, and so it didn't do as good as I thought it should. But what I found was that I could put that weight in the very front of the arrow, inside the arrow shaft, in the form of an insert, if I machine it myself and stick it in there.
Yep.
And then I could keep my arrow, my broadhead, nice and thin, and so that it didn't overwhelm the shaft of the arrow and whatnot. So the wound was smaller, but at the same time, it made it persist on through the animal.
Yeah,
that's the way I solved that problem. But the 618 grain Bishop broadhead I tried on wildebeest, I thought it was going to be the answer to all my prayers, and and it worked just a lot like everything else you think is going to be the one answer for everybody. It's not the one answer for everybody, and it proved to be too thick.
Yeah.
And in order to get that much weight in the broadhead, it was very thick, and so that slowed it down. So what I found a much better way to do it was to build those inserts and put them inside the arrow. So
did you ever
add the,
I was just going to say, did you ever find, so when I've done, if I'm using, like a standard crossbow insert from just an arrow, basically a finished arrow, one that I haven't built, something in like that 60, 65-ish, grain weight, or even honestly some of the like 110-ish inserts that, I guess, did you ever find with like this, 618 grain Bishop broadhead, that when you put that on the front and you had, I don't know what your insert weight was, but let's just say it's not very much, did that still fly okay for you? Like, did you overwhelm the shaft with so much FOC that it, on basically you pulling the trigger, the arrow being loaded, like it flexed too much? Because I've, I guess, seen with some of the, doing some of the similar things that Troy does, not in a bare shaft sense, but basically shooting crossbow arrows through paper at close range and upping point weight until you get to a point where you've got so much weight up front that the arrow is starting to tear poorly through paper. And I was wondering if you ever saw that with some of those really heavy broadheads, where you, like what you're saying, you're transitioning some of that weight now into the insert, and with a heavy insert, it's also needing to be long, so it's supporting, or you're adding basically structural integrity to more of the front end, which is kind of like shortening the shaft to where you're making it stiffer to then be able to accommodate some more of that weight up front. Hopefully what I'm saying is making sense. Just in the sense of, like, did you ever find a point where accuracy, you needed or wanted more, whether it was total arrow weight or total FOC, but you were struggling with accuracy from so much point weight that you then had to move it into the insert to, somewhat reduce FOC, but add more structural integrity to stiffen that arrow up? Did that ever come to be, or was
I know where you're going. I think I know where you're going with it. That, and correct me if I'm wrong when I start explaining this. Be sure and let me know. But yeah, I found that it's a balancing act between the arrow spine,
Yep,
and the weight of the point, and as you go super heavy on those points to get that FOC up and all that, then all of a sudden you find that you've exceeded the limits of the arrow spine.
Yep.
So when you shoot it, it wobbles all over the place.
Yep.
And yeah, I found that, and I found that you can. I've even read in places, I can't recall the source, but somebody along the way in all my research said, "Oh, well, you can't ever have too much spine." Well, yes, you can. So,
describe what too much, like, from like a flight perspective, or what is it effectively flying poorly, similar to too little spine?
Right. Yeah. You get
Yeah.
right back into that thing wobbling all over the place.
Okay.
And so what I found was you have to consider all of those elements. And like I said, you can't go out and do this the week before you're going to leave on a hunting trip. That's why I got where I just started. As soon as I got home from one trip, I'd start working on the arrows for the next trip, so that I could consider all of those things. The way I ran into this was that I started making heavier and heavier arrows. Well, one way to do that was to make the arrow itself heavier. And so
Okay.
I started inserting a carbon shaft down the middle of another carbon shaft, or carbon shaft down the middle of an aluminum shaft, or whatever. I tried 100 different combinations of all of that, probably several hundred. But what I found was, when they talk about, like in Ed Ashby's stuff, where he talks about a 650 grain arrow being the tipping point for penetration.
Yep.
And well, it's not just 650 grains; it's where that 650 grains is at.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't just take any old arrow and weight it up to 650 grains. You have to make sure that 650 grains comes from the right place, and that's where your FOC comes in. It needs to be in front of that balance point. And what I found making my own inserts and stuff was that if I got that weight back behind the balance point, if I just kept adding weight and adding weight and adding weight, well, sooner or later, you've only got a certain amount of space inside that arrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you have to start making them longer and longer and longer to make them heavier.
Yep.
And when you get back past that balance point, all of a sudden, all the grain weight that you're putting into that is actually making that arrow more and more unbalanced, because you're adding weight back behind the balance point. So it's no longer a front of center; it's back of the center, and that's really bad real quick.
Yep.
And so then the other alternative, of course, is to keep it out in front and start changing your materials. And I did some with some tungsten carbide, and that's great if you can get tungsten carbide and machine it. And you can't machine tungsten carbide because actually the tools on your lathe are built out of tungsten carbide, right? So then you have to start grinding it, which is a whole different process. It takes a different setup, so you can make jigs and stuff on your lathe to hold your grinder and all of that. But then it's a mess because you got tungsten carbide dust in the machinery there that's trying to slide and work on your lathe. So you have to clean it super clean every time you use it. So it becomes just such a labor-intensive process that it's really not worth it. So the other thing is, when I started doing the super heavy stuff and trying to make the arrow stiffer, well, the spine of the arrow, you can get an arrow spine that's way too stiff.
Yeah.
And some people have actually told me you can't do that. That what you're worried about is a spine that's too flimsy. And yes, that's a concern. But you get it up where it's not too flimsy. You can also get it where it's too stiff. So you have to check those out. And here again, you can't do that 2 weeks before you could leave it for Africa, right?
I'll tell you what, too. That might be one of my biggest pet peeves in the crossbow space is, not, for the most part, no, main manufacturers of crossbow arrows like offer different spines or list what they are, or heck, maybe it's one of those things where they don't even, know exactly how to measure it. But just being able to understand different shafts, materials, and exactly how stiff they are, so you can know how you can play with them a little bit, like in the vertical bow world, the compound bow world. Every arrow, what the spine is. In the crossbow side of things, basically none of them, what it is.
Well, the crossbow arrows, normally they call an arrow in a crossbow a bolt. Well, that's kind of an archaic term, and it comes from the days when it originated. But those arrows that they're calling arrow bolts, those damn things were like 1 inch in diameter or 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and stiff, and not all that long, 16 inches maybe, something like that. Well, if you've noticed in my descriptions, which is one reason why I put all that information in the book, I went from 18-inch arrows there to where I was normally shooting like 22 to even 24-inch arrows.
Okay.
The reason being is so that I could get that weight stuff in the front of them and still be forward of center. But some of the crossbows that people are using, they're using like 16-inch arrows or 16-inch bolts. And so you've only got a couple of inches to work with in the front. And so that's kind of why I went to those longer arrows. And people talk about, well, they didn't want the arrow sticking out in front of the stirrup or whatever like that. You shouldn't be having anything in front of that stirrup if you got your bow cocked. You shouldn't be waving anything in front of you. You shouldn't be setting it on your foot or anything like that, because that's like a loaded gun.
Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
It's also got all the failure points of a loaded gun, the trigger, for one thing. And so triggers can wear out, safeties can wear out, triggers can get bumped and and hit when they're not expected to. So if you'll notice, well, I don't. If you look at my videos online, I take that arrow out when I'm walking around with that crossbow. So it'd be the same thing if you're going to walk around with your gun, is just to keep the bolt open, take the shell out, and when you get ready to shoot something, you put the shell in and you shoot it. And so when I get ready to shoot something, I put the arrow in. I may be walking around with that crossbow cocked, but because that's the part that takes the longest amount of time. So when I get to where I'm going to shoot something, that's when I put the arrow in it, because that crossbow is very dangerous, because it's got all the failure points of a firearm. It's got a trigger, it's got a safety, and all of those things can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to be walking around with that crossbow cocked, because it's too easy to move that thing around and get it pointed at somebody else or something like that. And so I just got in the habit of taking that arrow out and carrying it, and only when I've got a target in front of me do I put that arrow in, just like the standard safety for a firearm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't put a bullet in there when you're ready to shoot something. And so luckily I've never had anything go wrong in that respect, but I did have a guy lean over my crossbow trying to see what I was shooting at. And these guys that are not used to crossbows, they're only used to going hunting with people that have guns. You have to keep an eye on everybody else, you know. And like on my hippo hunt there, when we first got to our little village that they'd built there on the side of the river, so my guide wanted to shoot the thing and see if anything was messed up from the airplane trip and the luggage handling and all that. And so we got there, and so we went out and set up a target there, and I shot a couple of shots. And he told the guys they were walking back and forth, in the compound there, carrying stuff back and forth and whatnot, unloading, getting ready to be there for a week or so. And so he told everybody, okay, watch out, we're going to shoot. So everybody stopped. I put that thing to my shoulders, so everybody put their fingers in their ears. So I shot it, and then he signaled that all was okay, and they didn't hear any noise. So they did not respect that crossbow at all.
Mm-hmm.
They thought it was a joke, and they didn't see, they could not see how that was going to kill anything. And after I put an arrow completely through a hippo, then all of a sudden, every time you went to go somewhere, one of those guys would run over there and grab that crossbow to carry it for you. Until that point in the trip, until basically it was all over, I had to carry that thing myself. They didn't respect it at all. So, anyway, in my video, if you go on the Crossbow, and you can look up my videos there on YouTube.
Okay.
In my video, you'll see this guy come running up there all excited and telling me about it and everything. And then he grabs my bow while I was sitting there cocking it and getting ready. But when he grabbed my bow, I reached down and flicked the safety on, made sure the safety was on when he grabbed it. And the Crossbow guy noticed that, but nobody else has really noticed it. And then after that, I had to make sure that I showed him. I normally didn't let him carry it when it was cocked.
Yeah.
It's very easy to get your hand inside that triangle there, where between the string and the bow. When the string is cocked back, it makes that little triangle there. Well, they grab it right in the middle, and that'll cut your fingers off if it goes off. So, but I had a guy lean over, and when I was shooting at a forget what it was I was shooting at there. I was going to shoot at something. Oh, the heck was it? Thinking it was a sable. I think it was. I was going to shoot at a sable, and I was very intent on this sable and getting everything just right. And I was kind of behind a tree and going to step out, and got stepped out there and was on the sticks and everything to shoot. And I just got the sense that somebody was there. I didn't really see him because I was crawled all the way up inside that scope. I was so intent. I wasn't paying attention to anything else. But I just got this feeling, and I backed off just a little bit and saw somebody standing there, and I very quickly yanked it to the side, and he was standing there just right at the tips of my bow when it's cocked,
Oh.
And he was trying to look kind of over my shoulder and look and see what I was fixing to shoot at, and or maybe watch the arrow or something. I don't know why he was there, but he was way too close. And I yanked it to the side, and when it went off, one limb hit the tree and destroyed my bow.
Oh, yeah.
It was a 350-pound crossbow, and that thing had hit him. That limb on the outside there, he hit him. He would have hit him right in the side of the head.
Oh, man.
He would very likely killed him. He like getting hit in the temple with a sledgehammer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, anyway, but that's, they say that ethics are what you do when nobody's looking, right?
Yep.
Well,
yep.
I wasn't going to, I'd already started down on that trigger. And so I didn't, I thought that thing was ready to go. And, he was fixing to launch that arrow. So I yanked it away from the side of his head and destroyed my crossbow in the process. And then I got to actually make good on that deal that I'd made with my PH there. He had his crossbow that I'd left with him. He had it with him. It wasn't the 225 pounder, but it was. He was capable of shooting the plains game that we were shooting there, and so that's I went to him and had him look it over because I thought I saw a crack in that limb tip, and sure enough, he said, "Yeah." He said, "I see the same thing you're looking at. And I wouldn't trust this, So
yeah.
He said, "I've got my bow here. Let's switch over and use it." So we spent the morning there sighting in his bow with the arrows that I had, and kind of practiced a little bit with it, and then we went on about our hunt, and I shot something with his bow instead of mine. But that tracker there still goes home to his wife in the evening. Still, these kids are growing up with a daddy.
Yep,
and
that's
if I'd have
what
gone,
matters.
Come on down with that trigger just a 16th of an inch more, there'd have been hell to pay there. His kids would have been growing up without a daddy. And it's really lucky because I didn't think anybody was around me when I was taking that shot.
Mm-hmm.
And he walked over there and his curiosity got the best of him. So it was a good bow, but it wasn't worth a kid growing up without a daddy.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, kind of like pivoting a little bit on, in your book, the penetration coefficient. This is the first time I've seen a basically this: a penetration coefficient equals kinetic energy multiplied by momentum. Is this a coefficient that you basically derived or created yourself and then correlated it to some of the game that you harvested, or is this I guess I don't know, where did this come from? Because it's very interesting, and the first time that I've seen it.
I ran across that in some of my readings or something, and I kicked myself for not writing down the source of that because I've been asked that question before, and I cannot for the life of me remember where I got that. And it was from a fairly authoritative source. I just can't remember who. So,
okay.
But it's basically just the opposite of the momentum or kinetic energy or something there. But I may have got that from some of Ashby's stuff. I can't remember where I got it from.
Okay.
But it's proven to be a very handy formula. Now, the thing about a penetration coefficient, it gives you what it would be a good measure if it doesn't hit anything else. And that's the failure of it, and probably why it hadn't been popularized any more than it has, is that there's so many things that can intervene in that. If it hits a bone, that's all of those formulas are out the window if it hits a bone. And
is it kind of, I guess, when I look at from your book, because you have, for each basically a kinetic energy, momentum, and then penetration coefficient, you have, for some different game species, values, recommended values as far as what you would want your kinetic energy, momentum, or penetration coefficient to be. When, reading your book, and I completely agree with the kinetic energy being a better measure of bow efficiency, momentum being a better measure of penetration. Does I guess, like, if you were comparing momentum versus penetration coefficient, is the application of like one better than the other if people are building arrows, calculating these things, trying to come up with like a baseline for, lethality, effectiveness, penetration, especially when you look at momentum and the penetration coefficient? Is one more useful than the other, or are they fairly equally weighted, you think?
I think that came from Ashby, but I'm not sure. But Ashby did more research on that than anybody in the world, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And he could never come up with it. Everybody wants to know the number, the solution, the answer.
Yep.
Everybody wants one number they can look to and say, this is a good arrow, this is a bad arrow, this is a good bow, this is a bad bow, whatever. And I've read everything I can get my hands on, and I have never found anybody that says this is the golden answer.
Yep.
So that's why I've included all of that. Everything I could think of, I've included in every one of those examinations there. And in fact, that's why I've even got that section of that book in there. On each chapter there, I've got a little piece about what I did, what worked, what didn't work.
What about
It would
when you look at too, which is I think a formula or a factor that isn't maybe talked about enough is resistance to penetration, or the formula for drag, where your velocity within that equation is squared. So I think this is kind of where, in some of this other kind of section of the book where it comes down, where it's the factors related to physics and how you did your arrow building, why it is important to basically try to gain, um, kinetic energy, momentum, which builds your penetration coefficient from mass or arrow weight instead of velocity, because of how drag affects it. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that drag equation, I mean, effectively, your arrow's always going through a medium, and the density of the medium can change, but it's always flying through something. I remember that was something that really stuck with me when I listened to some of, like, the 12 arrow factors and a lot of the Dr. Ed's stuff, of like, your arrow is always flying through something. It's flying through air, it's flying through hide, muscle, bone, organs, back through that same, sandwich of different things, all the way into the dirt until it stops. And drag is something, especially when you talk about crossbows and just how speed is everything. Like, well, my kinetic energy, my momentum is this, shooting this super light, ripping fast arrow. Why would I need to change anything? I think people forget about this equation of resistance of penetration, aka drag, in that velocity aspect of it. The faster you push something, the more effect drag is going to have at, which is, I guess, what it's almost like the polar. It'd be right in saying it's the opposite of momentum, right? As faster you push it, the less persistent it is to resist that.
exactly.
That
Exactly.
Okay.
That deal about squaring the velocity is, it may be a legitimate approach from the physics of it. I don't really know, but I do know that advertisers use that. Advertisers want to seize on something that's good for them, right?
Yeah.
So it's a marketing scheme, but they want to really focus the spotlight on some number that's good in their product. Speed is one of those things.
Yep.
Everybody crows about the speed of these crossbows or regular bows or whatever. They'll say you're 400 and some feet per second, all that. They really want to crow about that because it's good for them. It's good to sell bows. And but the fact of the matter is that speed is not all it's cracked up to be.
Yep. I always kind of think of it, or I guess try to, if I get this question, I always try to think of it as like, if a crossbow can shoot, I think the fastest I've heard, I think I don't remember exactly which model of 10 point right off the top of my head, but 515 is the fastest from the factory of a modern crossbow, with probably, I don't exactly know what arrow they were shooting that with, but my guess would be right around that 400 grain mark, because that's where most arrows from the manufacturers, what they're supplied at. Yes, does that speed produce a lot of kinetic energy and momentum from an equation standpoint? Absolutely. But
tremendous kinetic energy. Yeah.
Think of how much potential energy it has and how much, I don't know, loss it probably has, in that you could, if you did go through similar to how you built arrows, how Dr. Ed has, how Troy Fowler has, just how much of a monster you could optimize in with the weight, with, you might be able to shoot I don't know, I'm just spitting numbers out there, but okay, it shoots a 400 grain arrow at 515. It might shoot a 650 grain arrow at 440 or something. I mean, which is just crazy. I mean, absolutely crazy when you think about how much you can gain from increasing your arrow weight, how much more efficient you can make the bow, how much to that translates to, and the number, it's usually, I've done a couple videos, and this isn't necessarily related to it's kind of like a bonus of making your crossbow as efficient as possible, where you're not only optimizing how much energy you're putting into the arrow to translate to better performance and effectively a more lethal setup, you're also taking energy away from your bow. So your bow is now having to dissipate less. And the number, a lot of times, from what I've seen, isn't ultra high, but from like if your bow has to absorb, let's say 6%, 7% ish less energy on every shot, from like a fatigue failure standpoint, that can translate to the difference between your bow breaking potentially down the road or not. There's a lot of added benefits. Not only, I mean, like literally, everything lines up to how efficient can you make the weapon that you have. Ultimately, like what you've shown for not only the game that you're pursuing, but just optimizing it in its setup, what it's capable of, how much potential energy it has, how effectively can you harness that, and how effectively, when you harness that, does it translate to the animal that you're pursuing?
Well, for most people, that question is kind of a moot point. Yes, it does, but they don't need it. So if you shoot a white-tailed deer and you've got the momentum and kinetic energy and everything that I had on the Hibble arrow that I designed, it's really a moot point. That thing's just streaming. Most of the energy ends up being imparted out there in the dirt some more on the other side of it. Now, some people will take that to mean that they're wasting their time and energy doing that.
Yeah.
And I don't see it that way.
I don't either.
I want that arrow to go all the way through that animal and impart its final bit of energy out there on a rock or in the dirt or whatever, because I want it to get the job done first.
Yep.
Once it does the job, then that extra energy out there in the dirt and everything is just a byproduct. It's okay with me. I've had people express to me that they only want to get a bow that's strong enough and design arrows that are strong enough to get to the middle of that animal. And then as the animal runs off, that arrow will work around in there and cut him all up inside. I understand their line of thinking there, but it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah.
And I want to put as many holes in him as I can. So I want one on my side of him, and I want one on the other side of him too.
And I completely agree. I almost think of it too as sympathy is not really the best word, but I would say I can understand more from a vertical bow standpoint where people would want to sacrifice some of that momentum, penetrating performance, for speed to help with misjudging range. I can understand that.
Well, you need to have that arrow shooting as flat as you can possibly get it.
Yep.
So that if you're a yard or 2 or 3 or 5 off, you can still collect that animal.
Absolutely.
And that's a valid point. Yeah.
It is and I think it's a more valid point on the vertical bow side, being that there's more human error just inherently in shooting it. They're slower.
Right.
They're aiming, you're shooting it, you're using sight pins, spaced apart. Crossbows today, I mean, I've got the speed ring style scope that I shoot all Killer Instinct stuff. One that was basically co-designed with Killer Instinct from one of their competition shooters, where you can dial it in. And I mean, it is legit in its spacing from 20 to 150 yards for bows that shoot basically, 95% of crossbows. You've got range finding optics. Obviously, they have magnification to them. You've got the HHA optimizer or like jack plate style ones where you can shoot a traditional, duplex reticle dial scope and turn a knob and dial your range. So like there really should be no issue whether you're shooting 515 feet per second or 350, 340. I don't know how low you would even go with some modern crossbows still shooting accurately. Like you should be just fine as far as how fast it's still going with all of the aiming solutions that you have. There, to me, shouldn't be a reason why you don't optimize your arrow setup from a FOC standpoint, from a momentum standpoint, from a kinetic energy standpoint, from all of those factors to basically optimize the performance of that bow's potential.
Now, one thing I can add to your perspective there is the older you get, the more important those range finding scopes and stuff are going to become, because your eyes get worse. And so I find, when I was a kid, I shot iron sights on everything, and that's okay. And as I get older and older, I need scopes on just about everything now. And those scopes that have, or those sights that have the pins sticking out there, well, when those pins get closer and closer together, the older you get, the more error you got in there. You're going to use the wrong pin, or they're going to be blurry or whatever like that. So
that's fair.
Keep in mind the age of the shooter. So if your eyes are 100%, and you don't have to wear glasses and all that, that's great. Where that really kicks in is when you get older, or when you wear glasses to start with, then you need those things to be more accurate. So don't forget
perfect sense.
Part of your population there. If everybody's got perfect eyesight, that'd be great, but everybody doesn't. And so
that is fair.
So that's one thing that jumps out at me about what you're saying there, and is because I'm getting to the point where I need more and more powerful scopes all the time. So the scope I like is the one where you adjust the top turret for your range.
Okay.
And which is your elevation turret.
Yep.
But you'll have a little tape around there, and you mark it on, and or the HHA thing that fills the whole scope. It basically adjusts the scope mounts. Right?
Yep.
So
Exactly.
Those are nice, and then you can put on those kind of deals. You can put a fixed power scope like a 3 power scope if you got pretty good eyes, and you can go all the way up to 10 or 12 if you're older and still use your HHA range find or range adjustment thing.
Yep.
So and at slower speeds, the arc of that arrow is going to be more. You're going to be more like an artillery piece instead of the precision shooting. And so that's another reason why I don't like when people talk about these, 200 and 300 yard shots that they're making. Yeah, you can do that. You can go out to the range and sit there and put arrows in there and bust balloons at 300 yards. You'll see videos on YouTube about people doing that. The problem is when you get an animal out there at that range, if he's standing perfectly still and you hit him, you're okay. But an animal could be just meandering along, not excited about anything, not knowing you're there. He can take a half a step this way or that way to grab another bite of grass or whatever. And what started out as a good shot when you pull the trigger, well, 2 seconds later, when that arrow finally gets to him, it's going to be a gut shot or a complete miss or whatever.
Yep.
So that's one of the things that I did was in my practice and everything, I just kind of arrived at the general feeling that if he's within 40 yards, I can get him, even if he's meandering along and moving or something like that. Now, if he's running, no. But if he's, at ease, within 40 yards, I'm okay. But when he gets out there 50, 60 yards, even an animal that's just moseying along can change a good shot to a nightmare in a half a step, right? So
yep.
That goes back to that ethics thing, You sit there and see him run off with an arrow sticking out of his gut. You say, "Oh well, I'll get the next one," and just go on about your business.
Yeah.
Well, there's people around that do that. That could do that and be perfectly happy with it, but not me. But
Yeah, I'm with you. I shoot the kind of speed ring style scope, and I have the one that is very well calibrated out to 150 yards, and I've shot it out there just to literally see, can I do this? How well is this set up? And it was shocking how well it worked for me shooting off of basically just a tripod and a lawn chair. But I'm with you. I mean, everything. I don't think I've killed the deer with a crossbow over 30 yards. Most everything is 40 in. I practice with broadheads to 60, and I would, if everything was right, I would feel confident in that shot, especially if I'm not offhand from an elevated stand, if I'm more on the ground with a tripod type of thing. But I've never had to do it. But even with, I shoot usually right around a 500 grain setup, and it shoots a little over. It's like 352 feet per second from the bow that I have. But I just love that as long as I know my 40, as long as every stand that I'm in, as long as I know my 40-yard range, my 20, 30, 40 dots are so close together from, 0 to 40 that they're still within basically like a softball. So as long as I know my 40 where that one needs to be, if things transpo or like come together quickly and I need to make a shot and I don't exactly know the range, if it's within 40, my 30-yard pin is going to be within, or 30-yard dot's going to be within just a couple inches, either high or low of a vital. That's kind of the setup I like. Like if I can keep it heavy or heavy-ish and performing well to where that 20, 30, 40, I could effectively shoot just about any one of them from 0 to 40 and be well within the kill zone of a whitetail. That's about as optimum for me as it gets. And kind of talking. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to ask you about transitioning just a little bit. The German Kinetics 150 grain XL broadhead that you shot, and just how well you were able to get that to fly, because that's a big fixed blade. I know it's vented, but I think that's awesome that you used that. And I just kind of wanted to know how it performed for you on, obviously some of the game animals that you shot with it, but also just how well it flew.
It did real well for me, but
yeah.
Here again, I'm not shooting 60, 70 yards with it. If I was shooting way out there, it very well might become a problem because it is a big old broadhead. And I liked it for the smaller stuff and whatnot. It just made a bigger wound channel and all that. But
yep.
And the big but here is, of course, the accuracy and how much wind it's going to encounter. So if you got a windy condition, if you got a long shot that you got to make, probably not the one that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other big but is those ventilated broadheads like that are flimsy. So when you hit something hard like a bone, they're going to shatter.
Yeah.
And I had a long trek on a name just left me. An antelope, mid-sized antelope, shot with one of those, and it hit the humerus and broke the bone. But it was a sable. That's what I was trying to think of. But a sable can run a long ways on 3 legs. So he was carrying that front leg. And so I kind of swore off of any of the ventilated ones. I want the solid ones, mainly because of durability when your shot just doesn't hit quite right. And,
yep.
And if you hunt very much, you're going to have some of those that just not quite right.
Oh, absolutely.
I was going to tell you, I've got a really good example of that speed and the momentum versus the kinetic energy concept. And I don't know if it's in this book or not. I wrote it up one time and then decided not to use it. But there was a guy, when I got the hippo, okay, everybody's happy. Everybody's patting me on the back, telling me what a fine hunter I am, what a fine figure of a man I am. All this, And so everybody's elated. So we go back to everything kind of settles out. We get the meat taken care of. We get one truckload of meat going to the local village there, and we're sitting around that evening, and we're going to have some hippo meat for dinner. And the guys were talking. Well, I went to my little hut there and took a shower, cleaned up, went back, and I don't drink beer or anything, but everybody else was sitting around drinking whatever they were drinking. I don't know. Anyway, and they were telling stories, and as the night wore on, the stories got bigger and bigger. everything. And then one of the guys pipes up and said, well, man, this one went a lot better than that last guy that came in to hunt a hippo with a crossbow. And so I thought, what? Because I thought I was going to be the first, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, what's this? You know, what's going on here? Well, about 2 weeks before I got there, they had another guy wanting to hunt a hippo with a crossbow. So he shows up with his crossbow that goes 400 and some odd feet per second, and he'd killed all this many deer, however many it was with it. It was one of those, it's a reverse draw crossbow, and I forget the brand that, anyway. And so they sighted it in, and everybody was impressed with how fast it shot and everything, you know. So they go out there and shoot this hippo, and he gets a shot. He shoots the hippo, the arrow hits and bounces out. And so now the PHs, they're professionals. They've got to be licensed and all that, and in order to pursue their craft. So they got to be certified like like you think of a lawyer, you know, or a doctor or something, having to pass all these certifications, be part of the bar, you know, and they've got people looking over them to keep their pHs straight on the straight and narrow. And so they've got requirements. Well, one of the requirements is if you shoot something, you got to pursue it until nobody can find it, or you find it dead, right? You've got to bring it to a logical conclusion. You can't just say, oh, well, let him go, we'll get the next one. You can't do that, and that's part of their licensing procedure. Okay. Now, I'm sure that probably happens, but it's, you know, if they're serious about their license, they take those things seriously. And so they're sitting around talking about this guy. I said, well, what was that story about? Well, he shows up. He's got this really fast bow. He's really proud of it. He's bragging on it and everything. Now, keep in mind, we're in Zambia, and it takes it's like 10,000 miles to get to where we were at on the Luanga River. It's a long ways. And you fly to Johannesburg, and then you change planes, go to Zambia. Then you change planes, and to where we're at, you got to come in on a little plane. And so you got to have a private plane bring you in. You're talking about a hell of a trip by the time you even get there, and expensive trip by the time you get there. So he shoots this hippo, and the arrow hits and bounces out. So they get together, and they're watching the hippos, and they're trying to figure out which one is the right one. They're watching it. He gets out where they can see him. He's got blood running down from the spot there on his side. So then the guide takes his rifle and goes and shoots the hippo.
Okay.
And so then they ascertain, that was the right hippo. And, yep, that's the one that he shot. Well, the arrow didn't even go in far enough for the broadhead to hang up on the hide.
Oh, wow.
So they're showing me with their fingers how far it went in. It's like 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch, something like that. But anyway, so then you've got a situation here where they're trying to, keep this guy as happy as they can and in a disastrous situation. And so he's got an animal that if he does everything by the book, he can't register that animal in the record book.
Mm-hmm.
Because he didn't shoot it. They shot it with a rifle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he can't go and brag to his buddies and everything and tell the story about this trip because it was a wreck. And he's still got to fork out the money for the trip and for the airplane fares, for all this stuff that you have to pay for. So you're looking at $10,000, $12,000, $15,000. And So this guy leaves, and I'm sitting there thinking, I bet he was pissed. And I bet he was, you know, and I doubt if you're going to see him coming back to you. And those guys really depend on a lot of repeat business. You know, that's their livelihood. That's what they do for a living. So anyway, so you got a very disgruntled hunter who's you're probably never going to see him again. When he gets back, he's either going to have to lie to everybody he tells his story to, or he's going to be terribly embarrassed about it, or whatever. And just not a good situation. It's a lose situation all the way around. And so anyway, my PH, when he proposed this to his outfitter and everything like that, you know, they said, well, you know, yeah, we'll shoot him with crossbow if you want to, you know. So, but my PH knew that we could do it because we'd come up through there shooting everything bigger and bigger and bigger. We'd shot, at that time, I think we'd shot 4 Cape Buffalo. And so he was not at all worried about the bow not doing the job. And so that's where all that work and all that keeping records and all that stuff that I do came in handy. And is that I looked at that and I said, okay, the bow I've got would probably work, but I'm not sure. Well, I'm not going to go spend all that money on something that probably I want to be sure. And, you know, and I knew exactly where it hit at 30 yards, exactly where it hits at 35 yards, exactly. And I've got rangefinder, and you know, and I use it. And so through the year, I probably shot several hundred arrows of different weights and different sizes, and different configurations, and all this stuff to get to the point where I had it set up I was confident in. And so the first arrow I shot went through a rib on one side of the animal and through the animal and then stuck in a rib on the other side, didn't go through the second rib. The second time I shot him from a little bit different angle, it went all the way through him and now resides in the bottom of the Luanga River in Zambia. So, and I came home with a trophy, and I came home with a good story I can tell and lots of pictures, and I made a video out of a lot of the footage that I took and all that. And he came home and he's going to have to lie to his family and lie to his buddies and all that stuff from now on, or be terribly embarrassed. And so that's the difference right there between, you know, what you're talking about is, and that's why I spend the year working on that stuff instead of waiting until 2 weeks before the start of the season.
Absolutely.
When we started the hunt.
Absolutely. And maybe, you know, I do have to get going here in a minute, but I want to ask you one more question, and it honestly kind of piggybacks off of, you know, this particular individual who you're talking about. And I think that kind of translates as far as the equipment, you know, high speed, your whitetail hunter, that's going to comprise the majority of the crossbow industry and crossbow hunters. So if someone called you up and said, Jim, what would you recommend? I've got a modern crossbow. I'm shooting whatever. It's going to be probably between 400 and 450 feet per second, and I'm a deer hunter. What would be Jim Aken's recipe for a arrow for a whitetail deer?
For whitetail deer with a bow like that, you could go down to Cabela's, Sportsman's Warehouse, whatever you've got, Dick's Sporting Goods, whatever you got in your area, and buy your arrows off the shelf and probably be just fine. just about all these manufacturers are set up for whitetail, deer, turkey, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in the West, you're probably going to be fine by going to your local places and getting the arrows and everything. You're probably going to be fine for elk because they're used to that.
Okay.
But if I was doing it, I'd have to look at my data and stuff. But I think the numbers that you quoted are pretty darn good for whitetail deer. And I used a phrase in my book that I heard in an accounting class. I used the phrase in my book, but a couple of people kind of objected to it, so I dropped it out of there. But we had in my agricultural accounting class I had in college, one of our guest speakers was a banker. And so he said something along the lines that banking business is a lot like sex. He says, when it's good, it's really good. And when it's bad, it's still pretty good. So I used that phrase, that, and I was talking about what do these numbers mean? Because sometimes a good number is the bigger number. If you're playing football, you want the score to be bigger, right? If you're playing basketball, you want the score to be bigger. If you're playing golf, you want your score to be lower, right? So you got to know what game you're playing as to what those numbers mean and how they relate. And so I used the phrase that, like sex and money, I think is what I said. More is better is the way I used it. But, so, like kinetic energy, more is better. The bigger the number, the better. Momentum, bigger the number, the better. Like that. And now when you get to resistance penetration, then you want a smaller number.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used that phrase in there, and I forget who it was, but they said, I don't like it. I didn't think it was funny the first time I read it, and sure enough, it wasn't funny the second time. So I went through and took that out.
I mean, that does make sense when you think of basically a factory setup that number wise, you're going to be probably just fine. Assuming your broadhead's adequate, you've put your time in practice, you're confident in your setup, but obviously, like you said, bad is still good, or not. It's not even really bad, but it's good. But where you can take it to another level, obviously, is just going to pay dividends and be even better.
Well, I just can't emphasize enough the need to go out and practice and measure this stuff. Use a chronometer or whatever you've got,
a chronograph.
Chronograph, or there's 2 or 3 different types that they use. Some of them are laser based, some of them are sound based. Measure the Doppler effect, and some of them. Anyway, you need some way to tell the speed. So you can get a chronograph for $100, $129 nowadays.
Yeah,
and they're extremely accurate. And so use that. Get you a little scale. You can buy a scale for $25, $30. It'll weigh everything that you need to weigh, and get those kind of things nailed down exact.
Yep.
Don't just guess at them, and do all that stuff. Do your homework, and get all that stuff nailed down before you go out in the field. And But then you've also got things that, like I said, some of that stuff is marketing based, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't need a 450 or 500 foot per second bow, although they're really neat, but
Yeah.
they're really impressive, but you don't really need them. And those are kind of marketing things. And so what you do need, though, is practice with what you got. And,
Yep.
and set reasonable limitations to what you've got. And like I said, I've personally, anything out past about 40 yards is very seldom would I take a shot any farther than that. I would look at how can I manipulate myself to get closer.
Yeah.
What? But just because you launch that arrow doesn't mean that it's going to do what you want to do with it when it gets to the other end.
Yeah,
And that's
absolutely.
the part that's important. So the part that's important is out there at the other end of this travel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and the way I build my arrows and the broadheads that I buy good broadheads that I really am confident in, and they're not cheap. So when I pull the trigger on the thing, you're launching $100 bill out there without any shoot. And the time I take to build that stuff, it's just going to take. It takes a lot. A lot of people are not willing to do that. I've got somebody at the door here.
Hey. Yeah.
Hey, I'm on the phone. Come on in.
Okay.
So, anyway, that's, like I said, I just can't emphasize enough, and that's the reason I put that in the book there with all my
How you doing?
data and stuff, is that I wanted everybody to know that stuff, see what's important.
Absolutely. And I mean, like I said, I think you did. I mean, not only are the stories and the breakdown of the equipment you used really cool, but I think you did a really nice job, Jim, in this as far as the like the physics side of it and explaining it in a, obviously Dr. Ed, he's done a great job as well, but I would just compliment you on how easy of a read it is for basically anyone, whether you're a crossbow hunter or honestly a vertical bow hunter, to understand the importance of it, the math and physics behind it, and how it translates to, ultimately performance on game that can range from turtles in a pond all the way up to hippos. I mean, it's
Right. Exactly.
Yep. It's awesome.
You'll notice that book is laid out so that, for one thing, I use the definition or when I'm talking about those animals, I'm talking about how thick they are through the chest.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things that you read, they talk about the weight of the animals in pounds and stuff like that. Well, you can't always tell that in the field,
Mm-hmm.
and so you can't estimate that. And the other thing I've done is I tell a good hunting story that a 10-year-old can read and enjoy.
Absolutely.
Get into it a little bit with my equipment, stuff like that, so that anybody can go out and replicate that on their own. And then I have the formulas in there, and there's a section in the book there where it goes through and tells you how to work those formulas back to back.
Yep.
And then I have some charts in there where if you don't want to work the formulas, you can look your stuff up on the charts. And so I've tried to address every population that I could think of. That would be people that just want to enjoy it, like, reading a hunting magazine or whatever, just read the hunting stories. And I've had several people where their kids, confiscated their book, reading the hunting stories. And then you can get all the way into the physics of it if you really wanted to, but I try to get it deep enough so that somebody could really get down and do and know what they're doing when they're 10,000 miles from home, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, not only do I think you did a great job on it, I really appreciate you sending me a copy of it, and definitely, I'll post a link to it down below when we throw this up on YouTube, so everybody else can get their hands on it, because it's a great read. And
Okay.
just
Good.
just
That'd be nice.
yeah, and thank you again for sending it to me. Thanks for chatting with me too and doing this. This was great. I apologize. I do have to get going here, but we should do this again, because there's more stuff I wouldn't mind picking your brain on, especially as I continue to play with stuff, or kind of just keep a pulse on what everybody's doing, and some of the trends or the aero building stuff, the things that I'm hearing. I would love to do this again with you. You're certainly a wealth of knowledge. You have a ton of experience, and the proof is in the book as far as what you've been able to build and ultimately show success on. So just thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to chat with me and do this. I really appreciate it.
You bet. I would enjoy it. So if you want to do this some more or again or whatever, yeah, I'm all for that.